In 2020, Obsidian released their sci-fi RPG, The Outer Worlds, and in 2023, Bethesda released their sci-fi RPG, Starfield. But how do these two stack up against one another when it comes to attention to detail? So in today's video, guys, we're going to be doing a direct comparison of two different space RPGs, Bethesda Starfield versus Obsidian's The Outer Worlds, to see how they stack up against one another when it comes to attention to detail. And I hope you guys enjoy this video as much as I've enjoyed making it for you guys. And if you find yourself liking the video, be sure to drop a like on it, because as I always say, it helps the video reach new fans, and that's always a good thing. And I also make new videos like the one you're watching right now every single week, so be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any future content. But guys, let's dive into the video. Beginning with a comparison of space travel, in Starfield, once you actually plot your course, it'll cut to a cinematic of your ship traveling to that system, and then you choose where on the planet you want to land, cutting to another cutscene of your ship landing on the planet, where you then can go out and explore. Whereas in the Outer Worlds, space travel takes place completely within the navigation terminal, where you can see your ship flying from one end of the screen to the other, and entering the planet is as simple as leaving your ship, with no extra cutscenes of your ship landing or anything like that. The Outer Worlds seems to just want to get you from point A to point B as quickly as possible without all the extra flashy cutscenes of your ship landing and taking off, whereas some Starfield players may appreciate seeing their ship that they've spent so much time building. Now, moving on to the worlds you'll actually be exploring, in Starfield you do have some handcrafted environments with certain towns and cities, but for the most part, the vast majority of the planets are barren and are procedurally generated. Meaning, though the worlds in Starfield are much larger, the actual meaningful content is few and far between. While the Outer Worlds' worlds are much smaller with less of an emphasis on exploration, but they are handcrafted, meaning there's more interesting things to see and do everywhere you look. The Outer Worlds also has a much slower movement speed than what we see in Starfield, further artificially increasing the time it takes to explore its much fewer planets. And speaking of worlds, both of these games have interesting looking alien wildlife that inhabit their worlds, but I gotta say, in Starfield, they are interesting looking, but they don't offer anything interesting when it comes to gameplay. While in the Outer Worlds, the alien wildlife is not only interesting looking, but they also offer unique gameplay mechanics that make them more interesting to fight. Moving on now to the way you actually reach the different planets between the two games, and that's with your starship. And Starfield has a bit of an edge here, because in Starfield you get to craft your own starships. I spent countless hours building my own starships in Starfield, making them feel like home, not to mention you can actually pilot them around planets and engage in space battles, whereas in the Outer Worlds you have the Unreliable, which you can't pilot, though I gotta say I do love the Unreliable due to its onboard ship AI, Ada, because it made the ship feel like a character in and of itself.
What happened to the captain who kept pestering his ship computer? The life support was disabled. Get it?
Moving on now to a comparison of how each game handles cities and settlements. In Starfield, you have much larger cities than what you see in the Outer Worlds. They're also far more densely populated, making them feel a bit more alive. Whereas in the Outer Worlds, as I said, the settlements are much smaller and have far fewer citizens, though I gotta mention that it feels like there's more businesses you can enter without a loading screen, and the settlements are just overflowing with character.
Spacer's Choice, the brand of choice for spacers on a budget.
Moving on now to the NPCs that live in these cities and settlements, and as you can see here in Starfield, the NPC character models look fine for the most part. They have pretty impressive looking facial animations, which are better than anything Bethesda's ever released before, but not all the character models look that great. Whereas in the Outer Worlds, they went with more of a cartoony art direction, which helps mask some of the imperfections, but in the end, the NPCs look fine.
Hey, take it easy with that thing.
But when it comes to NPC interactions, the games are quite a bit different from one another. As you can see here in Starfield, this NPC isn't reacting at all to the fact that I'm shooting my gun right next to her. This isn't strange by any means, or I could walk right up to this guard and aim my gun directly at him, and he's just acting like it's another Tuesday. Whereas in the Outer Worlds, if I shoot my gun next to an NPC, they will react, because that's pretty strange, and also if you aim your gun at an NPC, they'll also react as well.
Don't even think about it.
The two games also handle crime quite a bit differently, whereas in Starfield, if you commit a crime, the security will try to handle things non-lethally by making you pay a fine or going to jail.
Stop right there. You see security.
But if you escalate things too far, it will turn into a shootout. Whereas in the Outer Worlds, getting caught committing crimes lowers your local reputation, but almost always ends in a shootout. Moving on now to a comparison of some of the weapons between the two games, and I find it interesting that in Starfield, that whenever you empty an entire magazine, the reload animation is the exact same as if you just would have fired a few rounds from the magazine, always chambering a new round even if there should already be a round in the chamber. But what I find interesting about this is that the Outer Worlds makes the same mistake. It doesn't matter if you empty the entire magazine or just shoot a couple rounds, the reload animation is the exact same, just as it is in Starfield. But I did notice in Starfield that whenever you're shooting a target, you do leave blood decals on the target, and blood decals do fall to the ground, which is a nice detail. Whereas in the Outer Worlds, no such thing happens. You do get blood animations whenever you're shooting the target, but no decals on the target itself or on the ground. But I do gotta say, when it comes to the moment-to-moment combat, Starfield does have an edge because its gunplay just feels tight and is honestly the best first-person shooter combat that Bethesda has ever made. Whereas in the Outer Worlds, the first-person shooter combat is serviceable. It feels fine, but I do gotta say that the melee combat, it just feels better. It's more kinetic. It feels like you're really getting a hold of them whenever you're hitting them, but the slow-motion focus effect does help the first-person shooter combat feel a bit better. Moving on now to a comparison of the water physics, and as you can see here in Starfield, whenever I shoot the surface of the water, it looks fine. There's a decent looking ripple effect, and it's honestly better looking than what we see in the Outer Worlds, whereas in the Outer Worlds, you can't even interact physically with the water. There's no reaction at all, which in Starfield, there's actually a really good looking water reaction whenever you step and move through the water. And also in the Outer Worlds, you can't completely enter the water. You can't swim, whereas in Starfield, obviously, you can. Which leads us to the final comparison in today's video, which is actually how each game handles waiting. As you can see here in Starfield, the only way to wait is to actually find a place to sit down, and then you can wait, and you can see the hours change hour by hour, whereas in the Outer Worlds, the only way to pass time is to sleep in your bed like the one on your ship, but it is instantaneous. Well guys, you made it to the end. Thank you for watching this direct comparison of Starfield versus the Outer Worlds. Two completely different space RPGs that share a lot of themes but handle themselves completely differently from one another, and that's what made this video a lot of fun to make, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. And when I initially sat down to record this video, I actually thought I was going to be doing a direct comparison of the Outer Worlds versus Fallout New Vegas, both Obsidian RPGs, but I decided the more I thought about it to compare the Outer Worlds, Obsidian's newest RPG, to Starfield, Bethesda's newest RPG, and the fact that they're both set in space makes it all the better. So either way guys, I hope you enjoyed this video, and one thing I wanted to mention here at the end of the video is just why I think this video is so interesting and fun to make and to talk about really is, like, if you take a subject that both these games have in common, like space travel, they both have it. It's not seamless space travel across either games like No Man's Sky. They both have loading screens, but Starfield, for example, wants to show you everything in camera. It wants to show you your ship taking off, it wants to show you the ship landing, it wants to show you flying through space and everything in between, whereas the Outer Worlds just wants to cut to the chase. You know, it just wants to get you into the world you're going to as fast as you can so that it can get you back into the gameplay loop that it thinks you enjoy. And it's hard to say which one is really better, because there's got to be a lot of fans that like the extra loading and extra cinematics that Starfield offers because they want to see their ship and see the space travel and all that stuff, while there's other fans that just be like, you know, we're sick and tired of the loading screens, just cut to the chase already, which is kind of what Outer Worlds is doing. On one hand, they're similar, and on the other hand, they have different priorities, and it shows, and I feel like that makes it more interesting. But guys, that's all I have for this video. If you found yourself liking it, be sure to drop a like on it because it helps the video reach new fans, and as I always say, that's always a great thing. I also make new videos like the one you're watching right now every single week, so be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any future content. But guys, as I said, that's all I have, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. See ya.